Welcome to another episode of Morning Mojo with me, your host, Shane Solomon. Today I'm joined by Millie Moore on the sofa. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Millie. I'm going to get straight into the content. How do you start your day, Millie? When you wake up, as soon as your eyes open, what are you doing to make yourself feel good?
I'm one of those really annoying people that goes outside and looks at the sunrise and breathes in the fresh air.
But that's great, though.
It's a bit cheesy, but it works.
And it's the simple things, that attitude of gratitude each morning.
Yeah, I don't really have a choice because I've got to let the dog out for a wee.
Okay.
But whilst I'm doing that, I make the most of the opportunity just to sort of ground myself a little bit.
Yeah.
Watch the birds fly over.
Interesting you say ground yourself. Producer Megan, just off camera, you mark this one. Ground yourself. What do you mean by ground yourself?
Just, I think, come back down into my body.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we can just get so caught up in our thoughts and, I've got to do this today, I've got to do that today, all these endless lists of things that we've got to do. It's good to just sort of take a few breaths, come back into your body and just, get that sense of calm.
Indeed. What do you think it's all about, Millie? This journey called life that we're on, how would you sum it up?
I think it's just a big adventure, really. I kind of always live by the mantra that, if I were to get, the worst news and I went to a doctor and they said, you've got one day to live. I live in a way that I wouldn't be annoyed with myself. So, I try and practice gratitude. I always say thank you to people, give everybody a hug before I leave the room. Any opportunity that comes up, I'm like, yes, I'm doing that. Just so that I know that, if it were all to end in a minute, I'd think, oh, actually, I'm pretty happy with the way I've done things and the decisions I've made.
No, that's a great way of looking at it. I think I would be the same, although I'd be really angry because I'd really want to carry on. But
there is that, yeah.
And there was one mentor that I follow online said once something like, it's not the age that people pass away, it's how much they've crammed into their lifetime. So, he said, I know people that, passed away at 40, but in those 40 years, excluding the bit when you're growing up and you don't know much, but in those years they cram so much in.
Yeah.
And then you got the opposite end of the scale where people live to 100 and they don't really achieve what they want to or whatever. So
I have people sort of say to me like, how have you done so much? Like I've lived about 5 or 10 lives already.
Yeah.
So
and at 26, I guess that's quite a lot, right?
I wish I was 26. I'm 32.
Shut the front door. What is going on here? The world's going crazy. The aging process reversing. Look, today we're going to talk a little bit about mental health and what you do within the charity that you work for. But how do you deal with your own mental health then? If you have any issues, if you've had any issues, do you have a backstory? How do you deal with mental health yourself?
I think in terms of mental health, knowledge is power. I think learning, and it's all very individual as well, like learning as much as you can about your own mental health, your own how you deal with things, your capacity to deal with things, your coping mechanisms, things like that really helps you to kind of work your way out of sticky situations. I had a really difficult period in my life when my daughter was born. She was very, very unwell. And as a result, I had quite serious PTSD. And I went on a sort of therapy journey from that. And I did a lot of CBT, which helped me to learn about how my brain works and why I make certain decisions or behave in certain ways. And then I also did some EMDR, which I don't know if you know what that is.
I haven't got a clue, tell me.
It's eye movement reprogramming desensitization. So it basically is really good for trauma. It means that it reprograms the pathways in your brain to sort of help you process and forget that trauma.
Okay.
So I've done a lot of this stuff myself. So I'm very sort of clued up on the mental health stuff and, different therapies and coping strategies and things. So, but it, like I say, it's very individual. There isn't really a one size fits all. You've kind of got to ask yourself some questions. You've got to look inwards and work out the best things for you. And like I mentioned earlier, like the grounding is really important for me because I can get very in my own head and become very anxious and overwhelmed. Breathing exercises are always really, really good as well. It sounds silly, and I think probably
no, not at all.
Yeah, sometimes people maybe feel a bit silly doing them, but it is really, really effective at re-regulating your nervous system again. I mean, like the classic box breathing is something I always recommend to people. 4 breaths in, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. If you can do that for, a couple of minutes, you can really get yourself out of this sort of really flustered, anxious state. And that helps, especially when you've got to go and, maybe do a big presentation or you've got really, stressful day at work. It can really help to do some of that breathing. That's something I do.
So I'm just doing it now.
You're doing it now. You're feeling calmer already.
Really, I'm telling you, I'm chilled right out.
He's snoring.
Gone. I no, and it's true because I did some podcasts up in London, and one of the guests was a breathing kind of expert, and she had
Yeah.
this app that she was just launching, very successful as well,
Oh, okay.
and it had all these different techniques and stuff like that. So I know it's
Yeah.
a big thing.
I think it's just like figuring out what works for you. And that might mean, trying loads of different things. Self-help industry is massive and, everybody wants to sell you a solution to your problems. But I think sometimes, like I say, knowledge is power, just getting out there, working out what works best for you. I mean, like cooking is my meditation.
Really,
That
well, we've got
really
a studio
calms.
kitchen here, so we'll have to get you in
Yeah.
and do a little studio kitchen sesh.
It really calms me down. And I know for some people, there's nothing more stressful than
Mm.
cooking. But for me, when I'm stressed, that's my go to. My freezer's full of tiny little boxes of diced onion from when I've been a bit stressed. I just go chop up an onion
Yes.
and then I'm all zen.
So what's your go-to dish then? What's your signature dish?
Oh, I cook all sorts. I
Yeah.
just did a really good chili,
Shut up.
lamb tagine,
Oh my goodness.
spaghetti bolognese.
Oh, damn. See, I'm doing a fasting thing. I've started my fasting thing. I go through these fits and starts of fasting because I'm big boned. So what I have to what I have to do is fast every whip and flip because I have this crazy lifestyle where I'll be going to the opening of an envelope for whatever reason in business. I get invited to all these lovely things and dinners and that, and I'll go crazy and then I'll drink loads and yeah.
Yeah.
So then every so often, so now, you talking about these wonderful dishes, I'm getting a little bit
Yeah, I think
hungry.
that's another kind of thing with the, like feeling good as well, is to put in that foundation. I mean, I cook all of our food from scratch, but that's purely because I love cooking and that's my relaxation. But
You make a curry?
yeah, I can make
from
a curry
scratch?
from scratch.
Wow. So I always
I
have to
make
get
my
the
own
jars.
paste as well. So,
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to have to get a session in and we have to fire up the studio, the kitchen studio, and we have to do a
Yeah.
curry together. Do like a chicken curry. I've got so many questions for you. Your techniques to boost positive vibes daily, what's your kind of techniques to boost your positivity?
Dancing around like an idiot.
I like that.
It's really good. Sometimes you can just get into such a low or a panic or feel so overwhelmed. And again, it's about like getting back into your body again, getting out of your mind into your body
Mm.
and just releasing some of that stress and just regulating your nervous system. So put on some absolutely crazy tune,
Mm.
throw yourself around, and you will feel better.
I like to sing a little bit. I'm not that good, but I do
Yeah.
like to sing. And I think it's the same vibration, whether it's singing, dancing,
Yeah.
doing both together, whatever. I think that's a great idea.
I like to sing in the car when no one can hear me.
Is that right? Well, I bet you're one of those hidden talents that are actually quite amazing. Now, let's talk about work for a minute. You
Yep.
work for the Pearl Exchange.
Yes,
So
I do.
tell me why you chose to work there. What's your story?
Yeah, I've worked for charities for most of my career, really. I worked for heritage charities because I did a history degree. So I just went straight into that out of university. And then, as I was saying earlier, I had this really difficult period in my life with my daughter when she was born. And we spent a lot of time up in Bristol Children's Hospital. And it was really traumatic. And there were a number of charities that supported us while we were there and with her care and things like that. So I kind of, from that, it motivated me to make the switch into family charities.
Mhm.
So I then worked for a children's bereavement charity, an amazing charity in Plymouth called Jeremiah's Journey.
Oh, I know them.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yes.
So I had a fantastic few years with them. And then post-COVID, I moved to Bude and I started visiting the Pearl Exchange. And I spent most of my COVID completely isolated. Found out I was pregnant a week before lockdown. So even when we had the breaks in the lockdown, I wasn't able to go out and mix with people. And then I had a newborn. So it was more or less sort of 2 years on my own. And I just remember seeing this advertisement for the mum and baby group at the Pearl Exchange and walking in there and just bursting into tears because it was so warm and welcoming and it was just exactly what I needed. And it brought me out of a really dark place. And I carried on going there. And in the end, sort of, they learnt about my skills and my background and they created this role for me where I'm now the partnerships manager. So yeah, I get to work for this amazing organization every day and go out and meet like businesses all over Cornwall and Devon and get funding for this amazing charity.
So that's your role then, to generate the funding and to bring the support into
Yeah.
the charity, is it?
It's sort of bringing awareness for what we do because we need people to know about us so that if they do need help with their mental health, they they know where to come. They can visit our website. They can get the free counselling. They can come along to one of our workshops. But obviously, at the same time, we are a charity, and we need people to donate. We need people to fundraise for us in order to do what we do and to be able to deliver our programs.
And why do we need these charities over having like the NHS?
Well, we're facing a mental health crisis at the moment, and it's particularly bad in Cornwall because people are so isolated. We don't have the transport links. Employability is a bit more of an issue down here. So, yeah, it's even more important in Cornwall. And there's sort of a drop off in terms of mental health resources and support from the NHS when people reach 18, which is why the charity supports 18 to 35-year-olds, because we're just seeing people sitting on waiting lists for therapy for 6 to 12 months, and that's a really dangerous time for people when they are struggling with their mental health to have to wait for that help. So that's why it's so important. They can come to the Pearl Exchange and get free counselling, 6 to 12 sessions of totally free counselling within a very, very short space of time with no waiting.
So explain the Pearl Exchange. So is it a physical building, or is it where people come out to you?
Yeah, the Pearl Exchange itself is a physical building. We're just in the process now of moving to a bigger, more centrally located building within Bude to make it more accessible for people and to allow us to have more capacity for people coming in. So we run various workshops. We run yoga, meditation, breath work, creative writing, different art programs. We run a DJ exchange where people can come in and learn to be DJs. So that's
I
obviously,
like that.
yeah, that's obviously like at our physical location. But then as far as the counselling is concerned, that can be done over Zoom, over the phone. So, people can access that from wherever they need to.
Okay. And what is the Pearl Exchange story then? So give me a bit of background why it started in the first place.
So the Pearl Exchange is named after Pearl Bamford, and it's her parents that started the charity. Pearl really suffered with her mental health, and she was a very sort of outgoing, creative person, but she also had these struggles internally, and she really struggled to get the mental health support that she needed, and she also really struggled to find an outlet for that creativity. There wasn't really a positive social space in the area where she could go. And unfortunately, Pearl died by suicide. And obviously that was devastating for her parents. And they set up the Pearl Exchange in Pearl's name and in Pearl's memory to support young people that find themselves in her position. Um, so yeah, that's the name. That's where the name comes from. It's Pearl's legacy essentially.
Okay. So what about those people listening and watching this podcast now who have children, and how would they know if they're having difficulties though? I mean, I
Um,
don't have children, so I don't know. But what are the kind of
I
are there any
think
signs? How it's just communication, is it, and
Yeah, I
just
think
talking?
there's been a real drive towards talking about mental health and talking about having issues, but unfortunately, there isn't the infrastructure there for the support needed. And when someone does admit that they have, a mental health problem or a mental health struggle, it's a vulnerable thing to do to say, I need help. And unfortunately, at the moment, there isn't that structure in place to support them. So
Mm,
people are very good now, I think, at admitting when they are struggling, but unfortunately, they don't have the safety net of, the mental health support that they need. So it's great that we have organizations like the Pearl Exchange. So, if someone was to say I'm really struggling, or, I've been on this waiting list for 6 months, or I'm actively suicidal, this is something that parents can signpost their children or their loved ones to, and they can get help almost instantaneously.
mm. Why do you think the NHS is overstretched? Why is mental health such a big thing now?
Um, It's difficult to answer, really. I mean, I lived within a hospital for 2 to 3 years with my daughter when she was poorly. And speaking to nurses day to day, it did come down a lot to the allocation of funds and things like that. A lot of money goes into the compensation programs, a lot of money goes into procurement. And that is money that obviously would be better spent on services, but the system doesn't allow for that. So
Mm.
I think really as a society, we really need to be asking some questions about how our money is spent within the NHS.
Why don't we just
Um,
get rid of it altogether and just do private?
yeah, I mean,
I'm one of these people that pay into the system,
I mean,
but
if
you know,
it could potentially work, but I think it's a very scary prospect for people. And you look at sort of the American healthcare system,
Mm.
and that is not particularly a
No.
stable model. So I guess when people think about a private healthcare system, they look at that. I know it works in other countries, but also the NHS is something to be really proud of.
Sure.
And I think the better alternative would be to sort it out and to fund it properly and to get it back on track rather than just to throw it all away.
Yeah, absolutely. Or whether there's a hybrid of the two, or something like that. It's like people that look after themselves.
Yeah, but I mean, at the moment, young people in Cornwall, they're on these NHS waiting lists for counselling because they can't afford to pay privately. So
Mm.
these aren't people that are going to be able to pay for private medical care either.
No, I know. I know. It's a really difficult subject. It really is. What can we do daily then, do you think, as humans to kind of aid our kind of mental health?
I think you need to look at sort of a holistic, whole well-being approach, which is something that we really, really promote at the Pearl Exchange. So, as well as obviously the counselling, we run all of these well-being workshops,
Mm.
and it's about looking at your whole self. Looking after yourself, eating well, exercising, getting good social interaction with your friends, looking at your sleep, looking at your strategies for coping with stress, having those in place so that when stressful situations come up, you have sort of that safety net, and just continuing to be open and talk about your struggles, or how you might be feeling, because a lot of the time I think we convince ourselves that it's just an us problem, or that other people don't feel that way. And when you open up those
Yeah.
conversations, you realize how many people are actually struggling, and actually how you can support people around you.
Mm. So where do you pull your inspirations from?
Well, I'm inspired every day by working for such an amazing organization and seeing young people come through the door, sort of poking their head round the corner, quite timid, struggling and battling their own demons. And then a year later, they're out there opening their own businesses, or they're buying their own house, or they're giving us this feedback that being at the Pearl Exchange has changed their life. Having
Mm.
this sort of job is inspiring and motivating daily.
What about personal development? That's a big subject. Do you do any of that? Do you listen to any audiobooks? Do you read things? Do you
Yeah,
have any
I
personal development regime?
I actually have ADHD, so I will read and listen to at least I'll listen to a book a week and I'll read a book a week
That's impressive.
because I have to, maintain the focus for things. If I need to complete a task, I need to have an audiobook on in the background. If I need to regulate my nervous system to go to sleep at night, I need to read, 2 or 3 chapters of my book. So I'm constantly reading and listening to things. And like I said before, information is power. So I get
Indeed.
a lot of inspiration from those sort of things.
And then what do you do when things don't go your way? So let's say you have an absolute mare of a day, and we've all had those. How do you overcome that?
I go to bed early.
Yeah. Okay. Just kind of shut
I
off for
just
the
go to
day.
bed, and then I think of every single day as like a new page, a new chance to, start again in a different mindset. So I just sort of, if I get overwhelmed or I have a really bad day, I take myself off to bed and I
Mm.
wake up with a new mindset and think,
I can relate.
time to try again.
I can relate to that. I can relate to that. There's been times, and certainly if I feel tired or things like that, I just cannot get going. I think, "Do you know what, that's I'm done for the day. I've
Yeah.
just got to sign it off."
Knowing when to just take the time out to rest and recharge, I think is really important.
Favorite book? Do you have one? You mentioned that you read a lot, so do you have one that kind of stands out there that our listeners and viewers can take away and go, "I'm going to research that book"? If
Um,
you don't worry. But I just thought I'd ask.
Just trying to think. No, I don't think so. I read so many different things. I'm just
Hmm.
trying to listen. I was listening to an audiobook on the way down about internal family systems, and I'm pretty sure it's called, oh God, what is it called?
Well, we'll find out. We'll put it on. We'll
Yeah.
put it on the video. We'll do
I'll
it on the
put
show
it,
notes.
yeah,
But
I'll put it on maybe put
yeah,
it on the show notes. But yeah,
yeah.
that's really interesting because again, that's about self-reflecting and looking at the various ways that you interact with yourself and how you maybe speak to yourself and treat yourself.
Favorite quote? Do you have a favorite quote at all?
Favorite quote.
One that just comes to
I
mind?
think like the most relevant quote to my life over the last year has been everything is project management
Okay.
because it doesn't matter. Sometimes a task can just seem completely insurmountable,
Mm.
but when you break it down and you look at it like an actual, just like a work project, whether that's in your personal life or in your work life,
Mm.
you break it down into the little parts and you work through the task methodically, it suddenly becomes achievable. And I
Mm.
think another one that I use is, hard is not the same as impossible, because sometimes we when things get hard, we give up because we convince ourselves that it's actually impossible. But actually, nothing worth having is easy to get. So just having that mindset of yes, it will be hard for a while, or yes, it will be difficult, but just keeping going, I think is really has stood me in good stead over the last year.
Never give up. Just keep going.
Yeah, just
We
keep
like that.
going.
And the word impossible, of course, broken down is I'm possible.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
have some of that. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to mention that I've not prompted you for in this podcast at all that you would like to, leave with the listeners and viewers about, you know, about your journey so far on this planet? Any kind of lasting impressions you'd like to leave with people?
Just that connection is key, really. I think like that's something that I really champion in not only my personal life but my professional life. Making that effort to connect with people is never going to have a bad outcome, whether it's in a work environment, just being that person to go over, make eye contact, ask how someone is, you know really connect, make that human connection, or even just if you're at the shop, have a little chat with the cashier, things like that. It really brightens up not only your day but everyone else's day to have genuine human connection. So much of the time we're just behind our screens or we're in our own heads, and actually just making the effort to connect with people is enriching not only for you but for everyone around you.
Absolutely. I think one thing I've started doing over the last few years, when people say to me, Shane, how are you? And things like that, my response always is now, whether I feel it or not, is I'm on top of the world. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
And the amount of people, I was on a Eastern Airways flight to Gatwick the other day, and the lady on the airplane said, "Good morning, how are you?" I said, "I'm on top of the world, thank you."
Yeah, I
And
had.
she turned around as if she said, "Wow," she said, "I've not heard a response like that before."
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's so
"What?"
funny. I was in Tesco's last night and I was just stood there with my basket, and the cashier came over and he went, "Oh, that's a big happy smile." And I didn't even realize I was doing it.
Yeah, yeah,
I was just radiating it. But,
exactly right.
he'd had about 200 miserable customers through, and that cheered him up. So you just got to put that out into the world.
It's a interesting thing. Listen, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I know that we're now our max time, so thank you so much for making the effort to come in today and talk about your kind of life experiences and tips and tricks to motivate our audience. And I look forward to seeing the progress with the charity as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shane.
Well, make sure you follow this lovely lady, and then we'll make sure we link Millie in on the description and everything. My thanks, as always, go to Megan and to Jay for making the podcast what it is today. Thank you very much indeed. But big thanks to you. Make sure you start your day right. Get your morning dose of mojo here on Morning Mojo. And yeah, that's it for another episode from me, Shane Solomon, and Millie. We'll see you soon. Have the most amazing remainder of your day.